Ken received his undergraduate degree from UC Santa Cruz, followed by a master's degree in international relations with a specific focus on Middle Eastern politics and security-related issues from New York University. My name is Ed Daly. I'm Director of Intel Ops here at iJet, and I'll be moderating Ken's presentation, prompting him at times with questions that may come to mind. Ideally, I'm trying to anticipate questions you may have, but I will note that we are open to questions from the audience. You can feel free to enter them at any time, and we'll cherry pick them when the time comes. We're expecting probably about 20 minutes worth of dialogue from Ken and myself, followed by, at the end, roughly 10 minutes for a Q&A session. We'll do our best to take a nice cross-section of the questions, both from clients and from the journalists that have joined us today. Again, just a very quick thank you for joining us today, and we'll get started. All right, first we're going to start with the background of this situation. Ken, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Basically going to start with a little bit of relevant history to the, Israeli and Syrian relations. These two countries are still formally in a state of war and have been despite the 1974 UN disengagement agreement. The two countries have not had an open conflict since then, but have since basically undermined each other via proxies, such as during the 1982 to 2000 Israeli occupation of Lebanon and via Syria's support for Hezbollah. Next slide. All right. With regard to the Syrian civil war, Israel has largely stayed silent about events in Syria, with two notable exceptions. It's publicly stated that its own personal red lines would be the use of or transfer of unconventional weapons, namely chemical assets, as well as advanced anti-tank, anti-air, or other advanced weaponry to the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. And in November 2012, there were a number of incidents in which Syrian forces shot into the Golan Heights region of Israel. At the time, in November 2012, there were clashes going on between Syrian insurgents and the Syrian armed forces centered around two towns, Bir Ajam and Barika, which are right on the border of the Golan Heights and by the UN Disengagement Observer Force controlled area. I'd like to speak a little bit about Hezbollah in southern Lebanon to provide a little background about this. The Shia militant group is extremely well armed. Since the end of fighting in 2006 during the last war between Israel and Hezbollah, the group has rearmed to a capacity that far outstrips what it was holding beforehand, including large numbers of long-range rockets, and it's also prepared fighting positions all throughout southern Lebanon and trained local Shia villagers in southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley to act as sort of like an auxiliary force in the event of another Israeli ground incursion. So essentially, they have a very powerful deterrent factor built up in southern Lebanon, meant to basically mire an Israeli ground invasion in southern Lebanon. They do possess advanced weaponry such as anti-ship and anti-tank weapons, but they do, however, lack a robust anti-air capability. Israel's main asset is, of course, its power. Hezbollah apparently does possess ZSU-234 mobile anti-aircraft cannons called Shilkas, which are generally effective against attack helicopters, but ineffective against modern fighter aircraft like the F-15 or the F-16 fighters that the Israeli Air Force maintains. Hezbollah has a definite stake in Syria. Namely, it's a part of what is called the axis of resistance. Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah all linked generally along confessional lines. Iran and Hezbollah are obviously Shia, whereas Syria is Alawi, which is an offshoot of Shiism. Syria is Hezbollah's sole remaining Arab patron. They have been a key source of weaponry, mostly of Chinese and Russian design, usually exported via Iran. Also political support and funding as well. And since Syria's civil war kicked off, the Syrian opposition has basically alleged that Hezbollah has been involved in the conflict since day one. Now, initially, I personally viewed those claims as suspect, but over the past year, it's become more apparent that Hezbollah has, in fact, been deeply involved in the conflict, both in combat as well as training the Syrian army in unconventional and guerrilla warfare. The Syrian army is mostly organized along conventional lines, and its main doctrine is based around fighting another ground war with Israel. So the Syrian armed forces have been largely caught off guard by the kind of insurgency and guerrilla warfare that they've been facing over the past year and a half, basically, whereas unconventional warfare is one of Hezbollah's main strong points. So they've contributed fighters to serve at the front as well as trainers to operate with Syrian army units.
All right, folks, we're going to take now a look at the current situation after Ken's given you a little bit of context and background. All right, let's now talk about the strike itself. Again, folks, this is call this an emerging situation is even an understatement. It's still very murky, but I think Ken has done a very good job of trying to pull together a number of facts that have made their way to the internet, to the talk shows, to the news outlets, and tried to sew together a number of scenarios that have emerged. So Ken, take it away.
Very well. Okay, so the events in question basically got started at around 4:30 in the afternoon on January 29th, when the first Israeli warplanes were spotted over two villages in southern Lebanon, Ramish and An-Nakura. Excuse me. And for roughly the next 12 to 14 hours, Israeli aircraft remained on station over southern Lebanon, generally rotating their warplanes out every 4 hours or so. Now, overnight, between January 29th and 30th, Israeli warplanes hit at least one and possibly two targets inside of Syria. At around between 12:30 and 1 o'clock in the morning, locals near Jamraya, Syria, which is about 10 kilometers outside of Damascus, reported a large series of explosions nearby. Meanwhile, the Syrian government claimed that these blasts actually occurred at dawn. And in the same general time frame, Lebanese sources in the border region reported another series of explosions near the Syria-Lebanon border, particularly by an area called Nabi Shit. And then at around 8 o'clock in the morning on January 30th, the last remaining Israeli fighters left Lebanese airspace. So I'll speak first about the possible target near Nabi Shit, Lebanon. U.S. officials have claimed that Israeli warplanes struck a convoy of vehicles that were apparently transporting either components or full missiles for a system known as the SA-17 Grizzly surface-to-air missile launcher. You see on the right here that this is a picture of the SA-17, and it's a large mobile surface-to-air missile weapons platform with radar-guided missiles with a range of, I believe, about 50 kilometers or so. Now, Nabi Shit is a known Hezbollah weapons depot. Like I mentioned, Hezbollah has basically prepared southern Lebanon as a large fighting position. They have weapons depots, fighting positions, choke points, etc., set up all over the place in the event of an Israeli ground incursion, and they often store weapons in villages in the border area. Nabi Shit is one such area, and on October 3rd, there was a large explosion inside of Nabi Shit that reportedly killed 3 Hezbollah commanders, and it's been widely speculated that it was ordnance cooking off in the weapons facility.
So Ken, many have noted the fact that Israel thus far, given the violence in Syria, has been pretty quiet about the conflict. in terms of its own involvement. Give us a sense of just what these weapons mean were they to fall into the hands of someone like Hezbollah.
Well, essentially, like I mentioned, Hezbollah has a very powerful, it's got a good arsenal of ground weapons, basically. Anti-tank weapons, heavy machine guns, well-prepared fighting positions, etc. What they do lack is an anti-air component, and right now the balance of power favors Israel with regard to that. Now, if Hezbollah were able to possess these weapons and field them effectively, that would essentially prohibit Israel from doing the surveillance overflights that it does over southern Lebanon on a regular basis, to say the least, of actually being able to effectively do an attack.
Fair enough. So what you're saying is essentially that Israel is typically accustomed to enjoying air superiority, and these could be a game changer, which is why perhaps they weighed in at this time.
Correct. All right, and then the other target, the one that was actually confirmed by the Syrian government, was apparently a military research center near Jamraya, which is about 10 kilometers northwest of Damascus. Now, in this strike, there were 2 people reported killed, about another 5 injuries, and a large fire was sparked. This was highly unlikely to have been the Syrian rebels, mostly because, as you can see in this picture, this is a major military zone and it is very heavily defended. There's a vehicle proving ground, numerous training sites, including for Syria's Special Operations Forces, and most of the fighting in and around Damascus has revolved around the northeastern suburbs, as opposed to the sort of like this northwestern area of close to the capital. And there's been speculation in the media that what might have been hit here was a chemical weapons facility. I view this as unlikely, namely because if it were a chemical weapons facility, then there would have been a lot more than 2 people reported killed, and there would be obvious evidence of a chemical agent being released. So it seems that it was in fact a military research center or some other military target. What exactly was being researched at this center or what it was developing is still unclear. Now, basically, one question that's come up is why now? Why would Israel launch a strike inside of Syria now with things being so chaotic and turbulent with the civil war and everything? Well, one particular reason is the risk of spillover and the risk that Hezbollah would be able to acquire weapons, more advanced weapons. So one development that was pretty significant was over the weekend, the Israeli Defense Forces moved 2 Iron Dome anti-ballistic missile interceptor systems up near Haifa in northern Israel. Haifa has previously come under fire from Hezbollah rockets. The last time was during the 2006 war. As it's a major industrial center, it's basically a very important strategic target. So the Israeli Defense Forces said that the deployment was planned and it was a regular routine thing, but it seems more likely that they moved those Iron Dome interceptors up there to basically act as a protective measure if Hezbollah had retaliated for the strike. And again, also the balance of power. If indeed the Syrians were transferring the SA-17 to Hezbollah, that would upset the balance of power, as I discussed. So this was basically a way of preempting that situation and preventatively restoring the balance of power. So what Israel basically gained from conducting these airstrikes, 2 different things, or on 2 different levels, rather. On the tactical level, they prevented the transfer of weapons to Hezbollah. A quick strike to prevent advanced weaponry from getting to the main threat on their northern border. And then also on a strategic level, to demonstrate the Israeli ability to conduct an effective strike basically at the footstep of the Syrian government without incurring casualties or inviting a retaliation. As I mentioned, Jamraya was a very heavily defended site. In the map on the previous slide, I did label a surface-to-air missile site located directly west of Jamraya, which is in red. and there's also a military airfield in fairly close proximity to Jamraya. So essentially the Israelis were able to demonstrate that they could knock on Bashar al-Assad's door and get away with it. And also, the entire incident is basically demonstrative of Israel's policy of conducting surgical, unilateral action against security threats. And they've done this in the past repeatedly, notably against the Osirak reactor in Iraq in 1981, Syria's nuclear reactor by Deir ez-Zor by the Iraqi border in 2007, and then most recently against a purported Sudanese weapons facility in October 2012. So this is basically par for the course, quick raids aimed at neutralizing a specific threat.
Okay, Ken, now I know that Israel is accustomed to international opprobrium when it conducts attacks outside its border. What does this mean for the Assad regime that is really looking desperately for a lifeline?
Truth be told, this doesn't really influence the direction of the civil war or the conflict in general. It's a notable incident, but it's one that doesn't really change the calculus on the ground. It doesn't really mean anything regarding his long-term survival or the direction of the civil war in general.
Okay.
Now, with regard to possible retaliation, both Syria and Iran have threatened to retaliate. Both of these countries' ability to retaliate is constrained. Syria's armed forces are heavily engaged with combat with insurgents across the country, and they would be unable to task their military assets with responding to Israel at the expense of surrendering territory to the Syrian insurgents or allowing them to fully encircle Aleppo or expand their foothold in Damascus. With regard to Iran, they also lack the capability to retaliate directly without sparking a broader conflict. Iran has quantitatively speaking, it has a very well-developed military, but in order to retaliate, it would have to basically dramatically escalate the conflict, which would invite a massive Israeli response as well as a likely international one as well. So the most likely outcome here would be Iran and Syria perhaps activating their proxies to retaliate via asymmetric means outside of the immediate Middle East, North Africa region.
So Ken, just before you address this, is what you're saying something along the lines of what we saw, for example, in Bulgaria, where a bus was attacked, and also in Thailand, where a number of Hezbollah operatives were arrested in the planning stages of an attack? Is that what you have in mind?
Yeah, essentially. Back in February of 2012, there was a wave of attacks against Israeli diplomatic missions overseas. One successful one in India where the ambassador was targeted, and then also two disrupted plots in Thailand and Georgia. And then again, there was also the suicide bombing in Bulgaria in July of 2012, which was also blamed on Iran and by extension Hezbollah.
So given the diversity of targets geographically and via methods, how do folks plan for this? Any sense at all of likely targets, or is this just kind of an open season by Hezbollah?
Hezbollah, I personally think, would be unlikely to directly retaliate as well. Directly retaliate against Israel, that is. If only because, like I mentioned, their remaining Arab patron is on the ropes. And if Bashar al-Assad falls, then most likely a Sunni government would take over for him. And as Hezbollah is a Shia militant group, they are highly unlikely to receive any support from a Sunni government, especially one that's made up of rebels who have been engaged in combat against Hezbollah. So realistically, they're likely holding on to whatever weapons that they have for the event of Israel actually attacking southern Lebanon again. Because if Assad falls, then their ability to be resupplied would fall into question.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So why don't we take a look at the regional impact, Ken?
Okay. Basically, what we're advising is for clients to be vigilant, but not to overreact. For one, additional Israeli surgical strikes are going to fit the pattern of coming out of the blue. There will not be any real advance warning. They're basically just going to happen. However, if there were to be some sort of massive action in the works, that would be telegraphed. Israel would have to call up its reserves. You would see more activity at air bases, which would likely make it into the media. So that would be something that would be well telegraphed out in advance. And again, Iran and Syria would both be wary of sparking a broader conflict by directly retaliating, because that would invite outside involvement as well. And realistically, the general situation in the Middle East remains largely unchanged despite this strike. The Israeli government will still maintain the same concerns regarding Iran's alleged nuclear program and its regional intentions. And also the Syrian civil war is going to continue regardless of this strike, or if Israel decides to do something like this again.
If you should develop some questions in the wake of the webinar, we would be happy to field them. You can contact your account services manager or call the main IJIT number, and we would love to get back to you on. All right, folks, we'll be signing off. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, everyone.